What's going on, guys? Kino Corner here. I want to take a break from my usual content to go back to my roots a bit. I started this channel as a way to look at how major film directors got their start, and in particular, I wanted to find out how they made their first films, which were often on very small budgets. Mainly, I was making these videos just to educate myself on how to make a feature on a shoestring budget, with no real intention of anyone actually watching them. I've kept them public, but please, don't go watch them. I swear I've gotten better at making videos. This embarrassment I feel when people tell me they watch my oldest videos is probably somewhat akin to the embarrassment Stanley Kubrick felt when people watched his first feature film, Fear and Desire. It's the one movie of his that he actively tried to get people not to watch. He reportedly destroyed prints of the film, and when the Film Forum booked a repertory showing of the film in 1994, which was over 40 years after its release, Kubrick tried to discourage audience members from attending the screening, which only made people want to see it more. Even though Kubrick hated it, I think that Fear and Desire, the movie and the story behind the movie, provides value for up-and-coming filmmakers. So today, let's take a quick dive into the film that Kubrick called a bumbling amateur film exercise, a presumptuous failure, and a serious effort, ineptly done. Let's take a dive into the one and only Fear and Desire. Stanley Kubrick, born in 1928, grew up in a well-to-do family in the Bronx. His parents were encouraging of his pursuits in photography, converting one of the rooms in their house into a darkroom when he was an adolescent. His at-home darkroom allowed him to really experiment with the form and grow as a visual artist at a very young age. He shot tons of photos, for his school, for himself, or just because he could. I think that's how he came to become so good at composition and lighting. Plus, the knowledge of photo development deepened his understanding of film as a material and its relationship with light. He'd catch his big break in the wake of a tragedy. On April 12, 1945, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt died in office. The nation grieved for him, and the young 16-year-old Kubrick captured the grief in this now iconic photo of a newspaper vendor mourning the loss of his president. That photo got Kubrick a job as a photographer for Look magazine, propelling him from being a teenage amateur photographer to being a professional. The photos he took for the magazine during his tenure there are quite remarkable, and I encourage all of you to check them out. But anyone who is a filmmaker knows that if you're a filmmaker and you're not making movies, it's like you have an itch that you just can't scratch. Kubrick didn't want to make an entire career out of just shooting still life. He wanted to direct motion pictures. The first of his short films, Day of the Fight, follows a boxer, Walter Cartier, as he prepares for a boxing match and then eventually fights his opponent in the ring. Even though it's an early effort by Kubrick, I was amazed by its stark lighting, interesting compositions, and just how entertaining it was. Kubrick's other short film at the same time was Flying Padre, a movie about a New Mexican priest whose parish is so large that he has to fly a plane to care for and preach to his parishioners. This film also shows Kubrick's early stylings, but I think that many of the shots in this short feel like they could have come from an early Bergman movie as well. Both of these shorts are available on YouTube for free, so go watch them if you're interested. Kubrick made both of these shorts for RKO, making little to no money on either of them. They both feel like an evolution out of his stint as a Look magazine photographer, partially because they're both human interest stories that feel like filmed magazine articles, and also because Day of the Fight is quite literally a film about a boxer that the young filmmaker photographed for Look. With two short films under his belt, the 23-year-old Kubrick decided he was ready for the big leagues. His next film wouldn't be a short, it would be a feature.
Do you think they're looking for us?
It's one of ours, all right.
There are varying reports on how Kubrick funded his film. The documentary, Stanley Kubrick, A Life in Pictures, claims that Kubrick's father cashed out a life insurance policy to fund the movie. SF Gate wrote that Kubrick's rich uncle, who owned a drugstore, gave Stanley the money to make the movie. Honestly, both of these could be true. The other contested fact about the financing of the film is the budget. Some sources say it had a production budget of $10,000, some say $20,000, and still others say $40,000. The highest number I found was $53,000, which is equivalent to about $585,000 today in 2023. But that number accounts for the final budget of the film. Supposedly, Kubrick had intended to shoot the film completely silent, but decided to add sound to it, which raised the cost of the film quite significantly. A movie producer named Richard de Rashomon provided the rest of the money for the project, under the condition that Kubrick help him out on another project that he was producing. Kubrick shot the film in the San Gabriel Mountains with a skeleton crew of only 5 people, plus 3 Mexican day laborers. The lack of crew forced Kubrick to wear many hats: director, producer, cinematographer, camera operator, and later, editor. He also had to use unconventional means to get the shots he wanted. Instead of using a dolly track, Kubrick made use of a baby carriage to get a tracking shot. He also substituted a fog machine with a crop sprayer, which almost suffocated his actors. That probably wasn't a good idea, but at least it ended up looking cool, I guess. The cast was also pretty small, with the film mainly focusing on a squad of 4 men. One of those men, the character of Sidney, was played by Paul Mazursky, who would end up becoming a prolific actor and director, acting in such things as The Sopranos, Carlito's Way, A Star is Born, and The Other Side of the Wind. As a director, he would go on to direct classics like Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, as well as An Unmarried Woman. I think it's funny that both he and Kubrick got their start with this low-budget film. So let's get to the meat of the movie. What's the story, and is it as bad as Kubrick thought it was? The premise of the film is that 4 soldiers, Mac, Sidney, Fletcher, and Lieutenant Corby, have crashed behind enemy lines and need to find their way back to Allied territory. The war, although inspired by the Korean War, is fictional. There's no indication of what country it's in or who's fighting who. But that doesn't matter for the film, as it's trying to be divorced from any real wars in order to comment on the universal nature of war. The soldiers make a plan to build a raft and float down the river at night, which would take them past the front lines and into safety. Naturally though, not all goes to plan. They get spotted by a plane, which scares them and makes it so that they have to get a move on faster, lest the enemy find their position. Then things get worse when a local girl happens upon them hiding in the bushes. They capture her and tie her up, leaving her alone with Sidney as they go back to the raft to make sure the coast is clear. That's a bad idea though, as Sidney goes insane and falls in love with the girl. No, that's not the right phrase. He becomes sexually obsessed with the girl, and let's just say that it doesn't end well. With their situation completely foobar, the troops decide to at least go out with a bang by assassinating the general of the enemy army. The general stationed in a house right by the river, and the 3 men devise a plan to take him out and then make a grand escape. I find it funny that the general and the leader of the stranded squad is played by the same actor. Talk about low budget. The film is pretty short, clocking in at just an hour long, but it does feel its length. Written by a high school friend of Kubrick's, Howard Sackler, the film has long diatribes about the nature of war and is never really that subtle with its ideas and themes. The acting is also a bit all over the place, with Mazursky's turn as the crazed Sidney coming across as sometimes creepy but also sometimes just goofy. Mostly though, the acting feels like standard 50s B-movie fare.
You see boat, our boat.
The editing is also clunky and uneven, with some scenes being fairly jarring with their cuts, stemming from, what I can guess, a lack of experience. There's one transition in the film that is so bad though, and it should have just been replaced with a cross dissolve. All these things I chalk up to Kubrick just being green and finding his footing as a filmmaker. What is great about the movie is Kubrick's cinematography. It might be a low-budget movie about some dudes walking around in the woods, a low-budget trope that the people at Red Letter Media are quick to point out in a lot of films. But Kubrick finds a way to elevate that with his compositions and lighting. I'd say that the film is worth seeing at least just once for the visuals. You can really see Kubrick's vision and style here, even though it's an early, rough, amateurish work. It's like seeing a glimpse of a diamond in a chunk of coal. I always find it fascinating to see what an artist made when they were still young and they hadn't quite refined their art yet. And here, Kubrick plays with light and shadow, as well as layering and texturing his shots. There are also some shots that remind me of Kurosawa. When the soldiers hide in the bushes, I can't help but think that Rashomon inspired how Kubrick photographed those moments. I can tell that all of his shots were very carefully composed. And you know what? If not for the good cinematography, this film would have hardly had anything going for it. It would probably be lost to time. Hell, Kubrick may not have been able to become the absolute epochal director that we know him as today. Well, he still might have, but his path to that legendary status would have definitely been more difficult. Kubrick managed to get Joseph Burstyn to release the film, marketing it as an American art house picture. The movie got okay reviews, but it was not at all a success. After Burstyn died of a coronary thrombosis while on a flight, the distribution of the film ceased, and Kubrick's undertaking of memory-holing the movie began. The film did do Kubrick some good. It got him positive attention and landed him a job shooting a corporate movie for Seafaring Union. It also allowed him to raise enough money to direct his second feature, Killer's Kiss, which is a much better film than Fear and Desire. I know that Kubrick famously hated the movie, and people like to look back on it and talk about how bad it is. I'm kind of doing that myself. I think, though, that it's actually inspiring that someone like Kubrick started so small. But before this video ends, I want to point something out. Kubrick made an independent movie in 1952. It's easy for us to pick up a camera, basic sound gear, and make a movie in the woods with our friends today. But that wasn't the case back then. Independent cinema was only just budding in America after the separation of the studios from the theaters as a result of the Supreme Court ruling in U.S. versus Paramount in 1948. Say what you want about the film and how it's not that great, but it took incredible courage for Kubrick to follow his filmmaking dreams at that time, bucking the studio system and launching one of the greatest directorial careers in history. He was a pioneer, and he continued being a pioneer for the rest of his career.